We're ready to unveil the rankings to you. Rece Davis, Booger McFarland, Joey Galloway, Greg McElroy. But a reminder how this whole 12-team playoff works to get things started in our abbreviated version, taking you up to Duke and Kentucky. The 12-team college football playoff will be made up, Joey, of the 5 highest-ranked conference champions. That's going to be the Power 4 champions, but it doesn't have to be. It's not defined by that. When you are among the 4 highest-ranked conference champions, out of the 5 you get automatic bids, you get into the quarterfinals. First round starts on December 20th, and if you're seeded 5 through 8, you will get a home game on campus. Playoff games, one of the great features of this 12-team playoff. Then we'll play out the bracket, no reseeding, culminates in the national championship game in Atlanta on January 20th, and that's how we'll wind up the first college football playoff of the 12-team era. As we take a look at this week's rankings brought to you by Prudential. We'll count them down starting at number 25. Tulane in the American, unbeaten in American play. They'll play Navy this weekend. John Summerall's team doing really well there. They're number 25. At number 24, also in the American, Army still undefeated. They're up by 1 spot. Army still has a game coming up with Notre Dame in the non-conference. Their game against Navy will not count in the conference standings. They are very close to clinching a spot in the American Championship game. Missouri, after pulling out a wild one against Oklahoma, is up a spot to 23 at 22. Eli Drinkwitz, by the way, said he's still in the playoff picture, and he is. LSU plummets after getting blown out by Alabama, but LSU still in the mix to get into the SEC championship game, which would give them a path for an automatic bid if tiebreakers were to go their way. South Carolina has been one of the great stories of the season. They are so close to having a better record than 6-3. Beamer's team's in there.
Yeah, they've been playing great and have come on strong the last few weeks, but LSU beat them in Columbia.
Yeah.
Circumstantial with Lenora Sellers getting hurt, but that's maybe the first part of the rankings that I would disagree slightly with.
But you have to remember, one game, head-to-head's not everything. That was a September game. We're in November. I think South Carolina's playing better than LSU right now. Oh, we're going to find out about these two. They'll play each other at the end of the season. Clemson at number 20 and still with a shot to get in the ACC title game, though the Tigers will need a little bit of help. Louisville at 6-3. They've lost to 3 highly ranked teams. And Jeff Brom's squad is up 3 in the rankings and just ahead of the Clemson team that they punched pretty good a couple of weeks ago in Death Valley. Washington State doesn't have a path to win a conference championship. They must get into the field as an at-large, which means they will have to make it to the top 12 or top 11, depending on where that 5th highest-ranked conference champion is. But the Cougs still hanging in there. Well, Colorado is surging. The Buffs control their path. They need no help to make it to the Big 12 championship game.
And because Iowa State lost 2 in a row now, Colorado controls their own destiny. And it's important where they're ranked, because if they win the Big 12, now it's going to be close with Boise State to see who gets that 4th spot and who gets the bye.
Boise State was ranked 12th, close to the highest-ranked Big 12 team last year, which we'll see a little bit later on as the Broncos continue to roll. Kansas State beat Colorado in Boulder, and they're 1 spot up, but Colorado has the edge at the moment for getting to the Big 12 championship game because Kansas State still needs the Buffs to lose again.
Yeah, that's no doubt. And I understand why Kansas State is ahead of Colorado, but if you're Colorado, everything's in front of you and you control your own destiny.
I think Colorado doesn't care where it's ranked.
Exactly.
Win your games and you'll get in. They'll get an automatic bid if they can win the Big 12. At 15, gig 'em. Down a spot, A&M with a big win over LSU, and then they followed it up with the loss to South Carolina. But again, like Colorado, everything in front of them, they can win their way into the SEC championship game and earn an automatic berth. Let's look at the second team out. It's SMU. The Mustangs, still unbeaten in ACC play. They can win their way into the bracket if they simply win their games. First team out. But Boise State is ranked 13. So they're down a spot, but they're still seeded 12th because in this scenario, they would be the Mountain West champion and the 5th highest ranked conference champion.
Yeah, very interesting. Boise State down a spot now. Still have not seen Ole Miss. Ole Miss fresh off the big win last week against Georgia. How high have they climbed now as a result of that victory?
Okay, so this is where you have to pay attention to rankings and seeding. Now, because Boise State would be a conference champion, they then pushed the 12th ranked team out of the field and that's the Georgia Bulldogs after the loss at Ole Miss.
Who would have thought this a couple weeks ago with how they went to Austin, handled the Texas Longhorns, but now you look at the Georgia Bulldogs, they got some flaws. I mean, the offensive line giving up tons of pressure last week to Ole Miss's defensive front. They couldn't get any pressure on Jackson Dart. The secondary, as a result, struggled. I mean, they gave up an easy touchdown right down the field to the backup quarterback. So Georgia right now at a crossroads with Tennessee coming to town, who clearly, not listed yet, ranked well ahead of the Bulldogs.
Georgia has the #1 strength of schedule in the country and a brutal road schedule. And right now, sitting first team out, but the Dogs certainly with an opportunity against Tennessee, as Greg mentioned. The team that put it on Georgia on Saturday, Hotty Toddy, and moves up, way up, and they're now number 11, and they would have the 11th seed.
And I just love how Ole Miss played against Georgia. The physicality, controlling the line of scrimmage. They built this defense to beat Georgia, and they didn't just beat Georgia, they dominated the Georgia Bulldogs up front. The future's bright for Lane Kiffin.
And the committee told us last week that who you lost to and how you lost is also a factor when it comes to the evaluation. Ole Miss, 2 losses by a combined 6 points, had 4th down conversions that were made against them. Had they gotten off the field in those 2 plays, they're an undefeated football team.
And you know, the only 2 teams who have trailed for less time on the game clock than Ole Miss, Army and Indiana, they're both undefeated, and Ole Miss somehow has had 2 losses. Let's look to see who is ranked number 10. Alabama, after the win at LSU. So the Crimson Tide was the last team in the field last week, second to last this week.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Alabama, they look like sometimes the best team in the country, which last week against LSU, they looked outstanding. But we've also seen them have some flaws. But they're peaking at the right time. Run the ball with Jalen Milroe and forget the rest of the plays.
and remember this, too. Both Ole Miss and Alabama, if it were to end this way, would be on the road with their first playoff game. Who's number 9? At number 9, it's Miami. Now, Miami, despite the loss to Georgia Tech, still the highest ranked team from the ACC. Remember, SMU, second team out, no conference losses, but not in the field. So since Miami is the highest ranked ACC team, they would project as the champion. They would go into the quarterfinals as a 4th seed, despite being ranked 9th. Joe, you with me there?
I'm with you.
4th highest ranked conference.
I don't know if I believe it, but I'm with you.
Okay, number 8. Fighting Irish and Notre Dame, ranked 8, seeded 9th. That means Notre Dame would be on the road in the first round, too. Against whom? The Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee, as Greg mentioned, going to Georgia this weekend. The Volunteers, ranked 7th, seeded 8th, would get a home game against Notre Dame.
And I do understand that Tennessee's got everything in front of them. I love their defensive line. That'll be the matchup of the weekend. Tennessee's defensive line against Georgia's offensive line. The winner of that battle will win that game.
And how about this? The way Ole Miss just obliterated Georgia's offensive line last week. Now these cats take a backseat to nobody.
They got to be licking their chops, Rece.
There are a lot of them in orange up front that they just rotate through. Ranked just ahead of Tennessee is BYU. BYU somehow escaped the Holy War, and they are still undefeated. They're ranked 6th, but they would be seeded 3rd as Big 12 champion.
And BYU has escaped a couple times this season, and somehow they find ways to win football games. Look, it is hard to win football games. It's hard to go undefeated. And as they sit at 9-0, there's the respect. But the question mark, they have Kansas this week coming up. The same Kansas team we just saw beat Iowa State. And then they have Arizona State, at Arizona State, who's also still in this picture. So BYU's path, as they've won close games, they have a tough road in the next 2 weeks.
And this is a correction from the committee. Like, they messed up last week by having BYU 9.
So low.
And look, BYU was a holding foul away from losing that game, and they came back and won. Now the committee does what they should have done a week ago, moving them up into the 6th spot where they belong.
I don't know that it's a correction as much as it is a response to 2 teams ahead of them losing.
Absolutely.
You had Miami and Georgia both losing, so they do get an extra spot out of it. Kansas is interesting. Worst preseason pick ever was me picking Kansas to go to the playoff. They've lost a bunch of close games.
Be careful.
Now they get a chance to be the big spoiler. How about Indiana? Indiana would be the 5th ranked team. They would get. How about if the Crimson Tide had to go into Bloomington, a stadium about half the size of Bryant-Denny?
Just a little less disrespect this week. I like the committee moving Indiana up. I get it. It was a close game against Michigan, but guess what? we can't always score 40 points. The defense is going to have to help us out. The defense showed up. The defense dominated in the second half. And if you're Indiana, you got a week off. And then the biggest game of maybe in the Indiana Hoosier history at the Horseshoe against the Buckeyes. But this still tells me, Rece, Penn State, who has lost the game, is in front of Indiana. That's what a little bit of disrespect comes from.
You're going to have a bunch of Big Ten coming in here, too. And how about this? Who else gets to say that their key wins are Nebraska and Michigan?
And Michigan, for what reason? Michigan's 5-5.
Well, because it's the best they've got so far. Penn State number 4, so Penn State would have a home game against Ole Miss. They just saw each other recently in the bowl game.
Penn State sitting back like, thank you.
Didn't go well.
Penn State is literally sitting there saying our best win is Illinois, and we're clean. We have nothing. We lost Ohio State at home. Doesn't matter. We're okay. You guys go ahead and play this out. Let's win our next 2 games to get in.
Number 3. Texas, highest-ranked SEC team. The Longhorns would project as the 2 seed. What's Texas' best win?
Vandy.
Vanderbilt?
Yeah,
I mean,
Vandy.
Some resume.
Hey, exactly.
Best team.
Yeah.
And if they think Texas is
So
best,
subjective.
based on football judgment, that's why we brought in the committee. You guys didn't like all that BCS computer stuff. That's completely
okay.
You guys didn't like it.
Texas did beat Michigan soundly at Michigan, the same team that Indiana struggled with. Here we go.
Ohio State, ranked
They won.
second, would be seeded 5th because obviously the Big Ten champion, the highest ranked team, would project to be Oregon, who beat Ohio State by 1. Look at all of the Big Ten in the top 5. B1G with 4 of the top 5 spots. As